Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share, and restack buttons. Well, bottom line, we've passed the point of no return. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the United States national debt. We've passed a point of no return, and it means really the end of the United States as a superpower. So let's take a look at this article right here. This is from the Daily Reckoning. It's titled The Point of No Return or No Returns by Jim Rickards. It says, should the U.S. national debt be considered an actual crisis? Does it have the destructive power of a hurricane, tornado, earthquake, or other crisis? The short answer is yes. He goes on, he says, the U.S. national debt today is about $35.7 trillion. Note that that figure is Treasury debt only. It ignores, he says, contingent liabilities. We'll say future debts that are owed for unpaid student loans, Social Security, Medicare, mortgage guarantees, unfunded FDIC insurance liabilities, which we know is going to come into play. We've talked about that, and much more. Is that a big number? Well, it depends. Suppose you owe $50,000 on a credit card. Is that a problem? Well, if you make $30,000 per year and don't expect a big raise or a business success, then it's a huge problem. On the other hand, if you make $500,000 per year, the debt is entirely manageable and you can probably pay it off just by writing a check. In other words, debt's a problem or not depending on the income available to pay it off. The same is true for countries. The national debt is a problem or not depending on the income available to pay it off. A good proxy for national income is the gross domestic product, GDP. By expressing the national debt as a percentage of GDP, you get a good idea of whether the debt is excessive. Economists agree that a 30% debt to GDP ratio is entirely comfortable. It's like owing $150,000 when you make $500,000. But at different levels, that changes. As he says here, he says, research makes it clear that a debt to GDP ratio of 90% is a threshold. That is the point at which the return of each dollar borrowed and spent is less than $1. This means, so this is mathematically, he should add, this means that not only do you not get your dollar back, you add more to the debt than you do to the GDP, which makes the ratio even worse and lowers the return on the next dollar borrowed and spent, which of course makes it worse. That's a mathematical way of saying you can't borrow your way out of a debt trap. Where does that leave the United States today? As previously noted, the national debt is $35.7 trillion. GDP is estimated at $28.7 trillion. That's a debt to GDP ratio of 124%, the highest in U.S. history. Obviously, that ratio is well above the 90% red line and is getting worse by the minute as U.S. deficit spending skyrockets while growth stalls. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio will soon be pushing toward 130% and higher. That's a level reached by failed states like Lebanon and super debtors like Greece. And let's take a look at some of those right now. So if we go over here to this website, has a debt to GDP ratio by country in 2024, and we can see the top 10 countries with the highest debt to GDP ratios. We pointed out Japan is in massive trouble. Japan is headed toward a currency crisis. We're going to see Japan, the fourth largest economy in the world, at some point, very likely in the immediate future, simply collapse under the weight of its own debt. And we see these other countries. This is not good company for the United States to be in. They have them listed at 129%. Maybe that's the case now. The article we were just reading is, I don't know, a few weeks old. So I don't know but they're in trouble, right? The United States is not in a good position. And we look at the company that they're with, Venezuela, which of course has had hyperinflation. Sudan, not necessarily a place I would want to live. Greece, which was on the brink of bankruptcy, multiple times 10 to 15 years ago. And of course, all of that's just gotten swept under the rug. So, guys, it's not just the United States, but a number of countries are headed toward a sovereign debt crisis. That, I believe, will be at the center of the next global financial crisis, which I believe started back in the summer. It's simmering beneath the surface right now. It's not in the headlines as it was back in August when we saw that steep decline in the Japanese stock market, the largest two-day decline in Japanese stock market history. But the problems have not gone away. Let's take a look at this from Shift Gold. It says, with or without tariffs, the US dollar is a Ponzi. And that's what I've been saying. The whole financial system, the entire global financial system is a Ponzi scheme built on a house of cards, constructed on a foundation of lies. It's set to topple over. And this says exactly what we just read. It says, with soaring deficits, soaring debt, and interest payments that can only be made by issuing a debt-based currency on which even more interest will be due, meaning this is mathematically a Ponzi scheme, the US dollar can only possibly be described as an elaborate nation-state level bankster Ponzi scheme. Dollars are backed by debt, which requires infinite economic growth to service. And this is something that many people don't understand. We've talked about on this channel before. If debt in general stops growing in the current monetary system we have, meaning if everybody decided to pay off all their debts tomorrow, the whole system would collapse. And you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. We're supposed to be in debt based on the system we have. Yes, it requires ever-growing amounts of debt in order to prevent implosion. That's, to me, the definition of a Ponzi scheme, and that's what we're in right now. It says, without constant inflation to erode the debt's value, transferring wealth from savers to the government and bankers, it all falls apart. Without new borrowers to sustain current spending, it all falls apart. He goes on, we can see that that's the case. And when you go back to the great financial crisis, there was this little tiny blip right here where things sort of leveled off for a quarter, and that almost collapsed the entire financial system. It requires ever-growing amounts of debt. It says, but at 35 trillion, our debt bomb isn't going away, and the deficit isn't going anywhere. A heavier interest payment burden and quantitative easing are going to blow the US dollar Ponzi balloon bigger and bigger, so the only question will be, when does it pop? Painful as the explosion will be, it's unavoidable and necessary, and will only be more severe the longer the Ponzi scheme goes on. Just as more investors get hurt, and more spectacularly so when a Ponzi scheme is able to grow larger, the US dollar collapse will be more painful the longer the can is kicked down the road. This reset will be an opportunity to go back to sound money, but as in the 2008 crisis, the same elites that caused it will try to exploit it as an opportunity to implement an increasingly centralized system that gives them even more control. And as we've been talking about this for a long time, yeah, they're gonna come to the rescue, so to speak, and I put that in air quotes. They're gonna come to the rescue when everything falls apart. We have the solution. Just take the central bank digital currency and these tokenized assets, these digital IDs. We've got a new system in place. And, you don't have to lose your pension. You don't have to lose your 401k. You don't have to lose all the cash that was in your bank account. We can have all of that restored if you simply enter this new system. So they've already got the system waiting on the shelf. The headlines have been filled for several years with the pilot tests that they're running, all of the different things they're doing to get ready for this system. They don't do that for something they plan to never implement. They plan to implement it. Goes on, it says, unfortunately, we're past the event horizon for the Ponzi scheme, past the point of no return. No amount of economic tinkering, even of the right sort and on a big enough scale, from Donald Trump or anyone else, can reverse or solve the problem without a major implosion causing terrible pain across the economy. And guys, this is what we've talked about numerous times. It doesn't matter that Trump got elected from the standpoint of fixing this. In other ways, it definitely does, but this is going to fall apart no matter who is president. This was baked into the cake a long time ago. This is the result of decades and decades of mismanagement of the economy, of the monetary system itself. It's structurally, there's a problem structurally with the system. It's coming to the end of its useful life. They know that. That's why they're preparing to roll in what comes next. Guys, the United States, many countries, the whole world really, is on the path to collapse. But particularly the United States and the US dollar, which is at the center of this current US dollar dominated global financial system. So let's cut over to this article right here. This is from International Man by Nick Giambruno. It says, the looming debt crisis is America following the path of collapsed empires. Spoiler alert, yeah, the answer is yes, right? It says, debt can topple even the most powerful empires, whether it's Rome, Spain, France, Britain, or the Soviet Union. Excessive debt has played a critical role in their decline. The typical pattern in these examples of collapsing empires is, stage 1, empires achieve success and become overconfident. Stage 2, overconfidence leads to extravagant spending on luxuries and wars. Stage 3, empires finance this lavish spending by going into debt. Stage 4, the debt grows to an unsustainable level and creates a crushing burden. Stage 5, empires finance the debt through taxation and currency debasement, otherwise known as inflation, right? The government claims, it's corporate price gougers, right? Or we don't know where inflation comes from. No, they know where it comes from. It's a tax. But they don't want to implement the tax for fear of revolt. So they simply devalue the currency. It's a legalized theft of your purchasing power. Stage 6, the populace bears the brunt of debt repayment as empires raise taxes and debase the currency to the maximum extent till it causes internal instability. Stage 7, empires cannot finance their militaries because of their debt burden. This is usually the tipping point. Stage 8, underfunded militaries plus internal instability make empires vulnerable to foreign invasion, domestic revolution, civil war, and other existential dangers. And then stage 9, the empire collapses. Now it's the U.S. empire's turn. The U.S. federal government has the biggest debt in the history of the world, and it's continuing to grow at a rapid, unstoppable pace. Annualized interest on the federal debt exceeded $1 trillion with a T for the first time this year and is shooting higher at an exponential rate. So here we can see what's happening with interest on the national debt. Look at how all of this is just in the last 4 years. Federal debt's annualized interest cost is already higher than the defense budget. It's on track to exceed Social Security and become the biggest line item and the federal budget. So we see here Social Security is currently number 1. Interest is number 2, I believe. Not sure how up to date this is, but this may have already surpassed Social Security at this point. If not, it's on track to do so within months. It says historian Niall Ferguson summed it up nicely. Any great power that spends more on debt service, interest payments on its debt, than on defense will not stay great for very long. True of Habsburg Spain, ancient regime France, true of the Ottoman Empire, true of the British Empire. This law is about to be put to the test by the U.S. beginning this very year. And on that note, we look at these debt to GDP ratios. There are only 2 countries that have, in modern times, I think it's hundreds of years, that have achieved a debt to GDP ratio over 120% and have not subsequently seen their currency be completely debased or they default on their debt. And that would be the United States and Japan currently. So history says it's inevitable that these things will happen. Either these countries will default on their debt or they will spiral into hyperinflation. But he goes on, he says, consider this, the American population is nearing its breaking point as taxation and inflation rise. I know that's the case for our family. The cost of everything is 2-3 times what it was just a few years ago. It says interest on the federal debt exceeds defense spending and is set to become the biggest expenditure, and it will keep growing from there. As a result, the U.S. empire is somewhere between stage 6 and 7 in the empire collapse pattern I described above. So let's go back up there and look at that. Basically, internal instability and inability to finance militaries because of their debt burden, usually the tipping point. So essentially, we're at the point of no return is what he's saying here. It's nearing a point where its crushing debt burden will make it difficult to finance existing military spending. As we saw in the historical examples, a tipping point is reached once an empire's debt burden becomes so great that it struggles to pay for its military. It's like someone waving a big red flag. The U.S. government will soon have to choose to, 1, cut defense spending among the most chaotic geopolitical period since World War II, or 2, default on its promises regarding Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, and welfare generally. Though it may try, the U.S. government cannot continue to pay for entitlements and defense even if their current levels stay flat into the future. But they won't stay flat. Both are set to grow significantly in the years ahead. Tens of millions of baby boomers, about 22% of the population, will enter retirement in the coming years. Cutting Social Security and Medicare is a sure way to lose an election. With the most precarious geopolitical situation since World War II, defense spending is unlikely to be cut. Instead, defense spending is all but certain to increase. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates recently said barely staying even with inflation or worse is wholly inadequate. Significant additional resources for defense are necessary and urgent. And Donald Trump has promised that he's going to spend more on the military. It says the most likely outcome is that the U.S. will try to have its cake and eat it too by paying for both growing defense and domestic obligations via currency debasement. What does that mean? They're going to print dollars, right? We'll just print the dollars, hand them out to the defense contractors, print the dollars, hand them out to the beneficiaries of Social Security and Medicare and all these other programs. But what's that going to do? It says, however, it will likely end up just like other powerful collapsed empires that preceded it, with an underfunded military and domestic instability. The truth is that Trump cannot make America great again any more than Gorbachev could save the Soviet Union. Once an empire struggles to pay for its military, the decline is impossible to reverse. Consider this, the denarius, the Roman silver coin, lost nearly all its silver content between 180 and 280. The US dollar has lost over 98% of its value against gold since 1971. Just as the Roman citizens realized their government was defaulting on its promises to them through currency debasement, I'm confident that Social Security and Medicare recipients and others who have been promised something from the US federal government will notice they are being paid in debased currency. They won't be happy. Guys, post-World War I, this happened to pensioners in Germany and Austria, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There were people who had retired on these pensions, and they continued to receive those pensions. The problem was the currency they received went from funding a nice middle-class lifestyle to barely being enough to buy a meal. And so that's what we're looking at here is the United States is just going to print dollars in order to meet these obligations, and they're going to destroy the purchasing power of those dollars. We're already very well down that road. It's just the last moments of that road that's traveled will be very destabilizing. Just as Roman soldiers realized they were being paid in debased currency, I'm confident American soldiers will realize the same thing, and they won't be happy either. In short, the U.S. will soon reach the tipping point that has caused the collapse of other powerful empires. Its crushing debt burden is nearing the point, really passing the point of no return, where it will cause the military to be underfunded and internal instability as average Americans bear the brunt of debt repayment through increased taxes, inflation, and broken promises on Social Security and other programs. Remember, the interest expense is set to exceed Social Security and become the biggest item in the budget. It will only get bigger from there as the debt continues to grow at an unstoppable and exponential rate. Therefore, I don't think it will be long before the exploding interest expense crowds out funding for defense, Social Security, and other domestic commitments. As that happens, I expect the U.S. is headed for a disaster of historical proportions. I'm confident that the collapse of the U.S. empire, which has been in place since the end of World War II, otherwise known as the U.S.-led world order, could happen a lot sooner than most people realize. I would change that to will happen a lot sooner than most people realize. The global geopolitical situation was already trending toward a multipolar world order. The U.S. debt crisis is compounding its geopolitical problems and will accelerate this established trend. That means we're likely to see the end of the U.S.-led world order. That's what the Bible tells us. We'll get to that in a moment. And the emergence of a multipolar world order in the not-so-distant future. Russia, China, Iran, and other proponents of a multipolar world order are no doubt asking themselves, why start a war when your enemy's debt burden is already leading them to defeat? Many people will be unprepared for the collapse of the U.S. empire. However, when you look at the big picture, that's where we're headed. And just like the collapse of previous empires, debt will play a significant role. When private businesses go bankrupt, shareholders get wiped out. When governments go bankrupt, those who hold its fiat currency get wiped out. Given the historical examples, one thing I think we can be sure of is the U.S. government will try to service its debt cost with currency debasement, inflation, just like many empires that collapsed before it. That's terrible news for the U.S. dollar. I have little doubt the coming months and years will be the most chaotic of our lifetime. You might say they would be filled with tribulation, right? The world is headed toward great chaos and tribulation. And the Bible tells us that we're headed toward the Great Tribulation, the 7-year period the Bible speaks about. Jesus and the prophets said to look for certain indications of the tribulation period, and Jesus said, when you begin to see all these things take place, know that I'm near, I'm right at the door. We see those things in our day and time, and that means we are near or right at the door. And guys, one thing we read about when we read about the tribulation period and end times events, the United States isn't mentioned in those. The United States is not the dominant power on the globe at that time. In fact, it's not even mentioned at all, which means that something has to happen between where we are today and where the world will be then to destroy this U.S.-led order, this U.S.-led global order and the U.S. dollar-dominated global financial system. We are on the brink of seeing that happen through the greatest financial crisis the world has ever seen. Will destroy this nation. I'm hopeful that the rapture of the church is before that happens, but there's no guarantee of that. Guys, the United States is not going to have a resurgence. The United States is going to really disappear from the world stage in terms of being a major player. That's what the Bible tells us, and that's what we're observing happening right now. So guys, it's just another indication of the times in which we live. So I want to take a look at another story, totally unrelated to this one. This one came up last week, and many of you already know about this, but just in case, this came out. This is from, I believe, the Christian Post. It says, Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth author, dies at 95. So this happened a week ago Monday. I don't know that news got out until Wednesday. Here in the United States, it was Thanksgiving. We had family over. We were engaged in family time. I wasn't paying attention to the internet, so I didn't really see this, I think, until late Thursday night. But guys, I don't want to just have this pass by, because to me, this is a big deal. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Hal Lindsey. Those of you that know my story know that I didn't grow up in church at all. I didn't have any knowledge of the Bible whatsoever. And that turned out to be an advantage. I was a blank slate. I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what my worldview was. Does God exist? Does he not exist? But I got ill, significantly ill twice, once with something called encephalitis, which is a very debilitating disease, and then an unknown disease that they never really figured out what was going on. But this caused me to ask these questions, these big life questions of what happens when you die? What is our purpose here on earth? Does God exist? All these big questions, and I set out to find the answers, looked in many places. I was reading a Time magazine article over 30 years ago, and they mentioned in that Hal Lindsey in this book, The Late Great Planet Earth, where there were these prophecies in the Bible. And I thought, well, if that's true, and there's prophecies in the Bible, if the Bible foretold events hundreds or thousands of years in advance, and that's true, and they were specific, not these vague things like you read in some of these horoscopes or mediums or whatever, none of that stuff, but specific prophecies, well then that would be proof to me that the Bible is the Word of God. And in fact, in the book of Isaiah, God actually says that. He says, let your false idols foretell the future. They can't. I can, because I'm God, right? That's what he says. So God himself says, this is my watermark. It's my signature. This is authentication in my word that I wrote it. And you don't see that anywhere else. But I went on this path and I discovered all of those things about Bible prophecy. And then, of course, I discovered that the Bible prophesied about the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of a Messiah, a Savior, Jesus of Nazareth. Found out all of that and went down that road because of Hal Lindsey. So I owe Hal Lindsey big debt of gratitude. And I know many of you do as well who are watching this, probably have a similar story. So I don't want to leave anything out. So I want to turn and I want to read this, a note that I posted on Substack last week. It says, Hal Lindsey passed away on Monday. Again, this was a week ago Monday. He was 95. I don't think the news became public until Wednesday, and with family in town for Thanksgiving, I didn't find out until late Thursday night. In 1993, I was a teenager in search of truth. I wanted to know what happened when you died and what was the purpose of life. I explored every avenue in search of answers, but every path led to a dead end. And guys, I looked everywhere. Explored Hinduism, I explored Islam, I explored philosophies, Confucius, Buddhism, anything that I could find, right? All dead ends. Then I read a Time magazine article referencing Hal Lindsey's best-selling book, The Late Great Planet Earth. Hal claimed the Bible contained numerous detailed prophecies of world events foretold hundreds and sometimes thousands of years in advance. Eager to see if this was true, I bought the book, and it proved to be a turning point in my life. Hal introduced me to Jesus, not religion, but an abundant personal relationship with the Lord, Creator, and Savior of the universe. I found answers to the most important questions in life, questions such as, who am I? What's the purpose of life? What happens when I die? Does God exist? I found all those answers, every single one of them, and my life has never been the same. I have Jesus to thank for that, but I have Hal Lindsey to thank for pointing me to Jesus. Hal planted the seed, others watered it, and God made it grow. And the Bible promises Hal will be rewarded for his work. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 through 9. Go read those. Make sure you're planting and watering in the interim so that you also can have a reward. It says, in the 31 years since I first read The Late Great Planet Earth, I cannot count the number of people who shared a similar story, saying, I became a born-again believer in Jesus after reading that book, or my father read that book, and then he became a Christian, his wife became a Christian, his children became Christians, the whole family became believers, and so on. I smile when I think this very week Hal heard the voice of our Master say, well done, good and faithful servant. Thank you for everything, Hal. You forever have my gratitude, and I look forward to the day when we first meet in the eternal kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ. And there's a number of comments on here sharing similar stories. There was one that disparaged Hal Lindsey, and I simply responded, all I know is before I encountered Hal Lindsey, I did not know Jesus. After I encountered Hal Lindsey and his writings, I knew Jesus. I came to know Jesus. And for that, I am forever thankful. So thank you, Hal. One day, hopefully, we will, I know we'll meet one day. And I look forward to that day. But in the interim, there's a lot of work for all of us to do here until our time here on this earth is over. We can see the finish line, guys. We're running a race. We're nearing that finish line. That's not a time to slack off. That's a time to sprint and kick it into high gear. So make sure that you are doing everything you can to share the good news, to share the hope you have in Jesus Christ with as many people as possible. So let me know what you think below. Leave your comments. Do you think, oh, no, the United States debt's doing great? Yeah, everything's fine. No problems. Nothing to see here. Leave your comments below. Or if you have a story about Hal Lindsey and the late great planet Earth, leave that below as well. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.